The conveyor belt is perhaps one of the most ubiquitous entities in all of Factorio. Sure, you've got assemblers and inserters, but chances are you've got conveyor belts running between them. Putting something on A and expecting it to end up at B is a core concept of Factorio and the automation genre as a whole. It's difficult to imagine the game without conveyors, which is why we won't be using them. So then we're going to be using logistics bots to move everything from A to B? Nope, we're not going to be using those either. That's right, without ever placing a single belt or roboport, we're going to try to not only beat the game, but build a fully automated factory all the way to space science. But without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to be playing the Railworld preset for various reasons, but chief amongst them is that I don't want to deal with the biters expanding. It also means bigger ore patches, but also farther away. And here's what we've got to work with. Thanks to Railworld, our starting iron patch is a little bit richer than usual. And that's good because, unsurprisingly, without belts, getting new resources is gonna be a little tough. The early game is pretty much the same with or without belts. We want a bunch of burner miners feeding directly into furnaces that we fuel by hand to start getting us a nice supply of resources. Obviously, we're gonna be moving those by hand too. There's a nest nearby that I'd really prefer wasn't there, so I make some armor and ammo and head over. Fortunately, it's only one nest. I run out of ammo, so I just start punching it. Well, that took a while, but the good news is my furnaces were making me plenty of iron in the meantime. Now that we've got a good supply of iron, we need some copper. With that, we can start crafting some automation science and make our first steam engines. Naturally, the first thing we research is automation. Just like any other run, we'll want some early automation to help us make electric mining drills and inserters, and this hand-fed arrangement is the easiest way to accomplish that. The only difference is, this arrangement is usually just a stopgap before you get your first furnace stacks up, but with no belts, we can't make a furnace stack. Yep, we need to move everything by hand, but at least we can make getting the stuff we want as easy as inserting iron and copper plates. With more miners being made as we speak, we can start transitioning away from the burner mining drills. Unfortunately, we still need to hand-feed coal into the furnaces, though. I'm going to be walking back and forth a lot to pick up copper, so making this path will save me quite a bit of time in the long run. Since I'm the only means of moving raw materials, when you think about it, it's kind of like upgrading a yellow belt to a red belt. Immediately after building it, a bunch of biters show up, and I need to craft the ammo and weapons as they're attacking. Thanks to the path I built, I can kind of outrun them. And then they get kinda confused and just accept death. Well, they saved me the trouble of removing the old burner miners. Shotguns are the best way to remove nests early on. Anyway, back to work. This isn't much of an improvement over making red science by hand, but it is an improvement. I make some ammo and head out to kill the other nests, and thanks to the Railworld preset, we know they won't be coming back. And for now, we're safe. With all these assemblers and miners, 2 engines just isn't enough anymore, but I don't want to need to keep hand-feeding coal into the boilers, and if I do this, I won't need to. The miners will automatically deposit coal into the boilers, no belts necessary, but it does mean I'm limited by the size of my coal patch. One science assembler isn't nearly enough, so I make a couple more. Unfortunately, I still need to hand-feed it with gears, but this research will help us get closer to true automation. We'll need green science too. It's a little more complicated than red science, requiring inserters and those accursed belts we're not allowed to use, but I managed to automate it down to only needing iron and copper manually. And with no belts, we're forced to create this horrible abomination. It all works out in the end, though. Now we need somewhere to put our new science. The biggest thing on our radar is trains, and probably not for the reasons you're thinking. It's going to take a couple hundred bottles of science, but when we get them, this run will unlock. We're also going to want to make some steel in preparation for the trains. Moving iron and dropping it in chests. That's the name of the game right now. With logistics and engines done researching, we can finally start researching trains, and after a little waiting, we get them. But we don't want them for the locomotives, no, we want them for the cargo wagons. And the rails. Make sure your sanity points are high because I'm about to unleash some forbidden Factorio knowledge. It really feels like the game doesn't want you to do this, but you can place a cargo wagon on only 2 sections of rail, and if we arrange them like so, voila, 4 inserters moving between 2 chests. Now this might seem like a crude imitation of a transport belt, but I assure you it's much more. These 4 inserters can only manage to move 9 items a second, which compared to the 15 you'd get from the lowest tier of transport belts, doesn't seem that good, but with stack inserters and all the capacity upgrades, we'll be able to move 110 items per second. For the space, that's actually faster than blue belts. Truly, this is some forbidden technology. Anyway, this is how I've contrived to get the iron ore off the patch. I quickly realize I need to sacrifice one of the inserters in order to fit a power pole, but I can't deconstruct the inserter without taking the cargo wagon off first. It's almost as if the game didn't intend for you to use them like this. And getting these things on is always a pleasure. But as you can see, ore is moving. But just iron ore isn't enough. We'll need coal to truly automate these furnaces. Although if we try to insert coal like this, the wagon will definitely deadlock, filling completely with either iron or coal and not allowing the other in anymore. But behold the true power of the cargo wagons. Unlike chests, by using the middle mouse button we can set filters in the wagons and ensure that a slot will always carry coal. This is a little tedious, but fortunately we can shift right click to copy the filters of one wagon and shift left click to paste them on another. With coal and iron in the same spots, we can insert them directly from the wagon into the furnaces. And we'll just put the plates right back into the wagons. As long as we filter a slot for them, there's no problem putting everything in the same place. Now we'll just retrieve the iron plates using filter inserters, and there you have it, automated iron, no belts required. Hopefully you've managed to contain your vomit, because we have still got a long way to go. Some of the furnaces started trying to make steel out of the iron in the wagon, but that's nothing a few filter inserters can't fix. Now we just need to do something with all this iron. Now the coal's fully automated too. I'm going to need copper as well, but it's got quite a ways to go before it reaches our iron forge. Each one of these cargo wagons takes 20 steel plates, and with our level of production, that's a lot. You may have guessed that placing these things is a little bit tedious. Just a little bit. Now we just build the inserters between them, and before you know it, we've got copper at the main base. So in terms of items per second, belts still have these things beat, but in pure distance covered, these things are practically instantaneous. Just like the iron, we need to set filters to ensure that there's always coal available to feed the furnaces, and space to put the copper plates. Since there's no risk of accidentally making steel, we can skip the filter inserters for the furnaces. And now we connect the copper to the iron, of course setting up a filter so the wagon can hold both. This is the part where it gets really disgusting. I'm tired of manually inserting iron or copper every time I want assemblers or inserters, so the first thing we're going to automate are some supplies. And since these wagons can hold anything as long as I give them a dedicated slot, I should be able to make whatever I need right next to them. And it seems to be working. And that is my graphics card actually crashing. In my over 5 years of playing this game, this is the only time I've ever had Factorio crash like this, and I can only assume it's out of pure hatred for what I've done here. Well, I'm not apologizing, and I don't have any issues afterwards, but I do need to redo the last 15 minutes. Anyway, here we are again. Now I'm just missing steel, and setting it up is just like the others. We can make the wagons diagonal too. To make steel, we just alternate between furnaces filtered to iron ore and furnaces filtered to iron plates. Plus the coal too. Fortunately, filter inserters let you whitelist multiple things. While the steel builds up, it's about time we automated science. Using the same concept as our future supply wagon, we can build everything we need out of these wagons and then put it right back in these lines. As long as we manage our filters correctly, there shouldn't be any problem. It only took us 3.5 hours to automate, but we've got red and green science. Now we just need some labs. Unfortunately, there's a cliff in the way, but whatever. With that, we're a little low on power, but fortunately we can just run a steam pipe and put the actual engine somewhere off the patch. And with my pollution cloud now expanding, it's time I cleared out some of the biter nests. Again, with the Railworld preset, these nests won't come back. With inserter capacity upgrade number 2, our wagons can now move 18 items per second instead of 9, but if we want to speed it up much farther, we're gonna need stack inserters. But wait, that upgrade wasn't all good. The green science assemblers are deadlocked. Now that the inserters can grab 2 items at once, it's possible for them to get stuck trying to insert the second item if the first one was all that fit. If all 4 of them get stuck like this and starve the assemblers of the other items, then they'll be stuck for all eternity trying to insert items into a space that will never be cleared, since the items they're trying to insert just aren't being consumed. Well, live by the janky mechanics, die by the janky mechanics. We'll need to try to manage it with filter inserters, because 9 items a second just isn't enough. We need the throughput. It's time we started thinking about chemical science, so I start automating pump jacks, chemical plants, and refineries. I'm not going to bother hooking up a stone forge to this wagon line abomination just to fully automate refineries. I'm just going to hand feed bricks. Gotta automate cargo wagons. If we want stack inserters, we need advanced circuits, and that means oil. There's a big oil field southeast of the base, but it's a little far to just run pipes, so I'm going to set up a double-headed train with a fluid wagon. Fortunately, this isn't a no pipes challenge. So my trains need fuel, but since this isn't a no pipes challenge, I can set up some chemical plants so they make solid fuel and insert it directly into the trains. And with all that set up, this train will just work with the simplest conditions imaginable. We'll need coal for the plastic, and I'm just gonna pull it straight through from the copper line. Filters and wagons, that's the name of the run. Now when the wagons are in this T-bone arrangement, I can only fit 2 fast inserters between them, which limits the throughput. There's a way around that, but I'll keep you in suspense. Red circuits need green circuits, so we'll just make another branch of this growing wagon tree and make them here. This isn't the proper ratio of wire assemblers to circuit assemblers, so these will run about 50% slower than optimal, but it's still plenty to make our advanced circuits. While those work, I set up some red ammo for defense and later military science. This intersection between the iron, copper, and steel is the perfect place to put them when you're lazy. Next, we need plastic. We'll just put the chemical plants right against the wagons. Because of the deadlocking issue, I'm going to try to avoid stuffing too many things into the same wagon, and so the circuits get their own. I'm also going to run the copper the advanced circuits need through here as well. Grenades for future military science. And some explosives so I can blow up cliffs. Now we can turn on the plastic. It's kinda funny just watching them work. Anyway, we've got everything we need. You only need 1 copper wire assembler for every 6 advanced circuit assemblers, so this will support 12. Although we can only fit 10. Because we only need the copper to make the wires, we can remove it from the filters of the later wagons. One less thing to deadlock on. Since we want to make chemical science, we'll also need some engine units. Fortunately, we've got a good space to fit them. We'll make the gears and pipes over here, so that way we can fit 9 assemblers and leave space to insert the engines back onto the main track. With filter inserters facing opposite directions, we can move the iron down the wagon line and the finished products up. This might confuse some people since those filter inserters both show gears and pipes, but the left ones are whitelisted while the right ones are blacklisted. That means they'll move anything that isn't pipes or gears, and in this case, iron. We apply this same concept to move steel down and the finished engines up. Being able to make these wagons bi-directional is an important thing to understand for this run. Again, the filters both show engines, but half are whitelisted and half are blacklisted. And would you look at that, it actually works. Now we turn on the red circuits and we've got everything we need for chemical science. Obviously we're missing sulfur, but we can use our pipes to make it directly into the science wagons. Now we set up the assemblers, the wagons, and the filters. Then, just like that, we've got chemical science. All without placing a single belt. It only took us 6 hours. Also with those explosives, I can fix what was annoying me. Naturally, I research advanced oil processing first. I don't need much of it, so these 2 refiners will suffice. I can also switch over the solid fuel recipe to light oil, which is twice as efficient. Anyone who's played the game before probably knows what I'm going for. Now some of you might be thinking, wait, he said this was a no-robot challenge. And well, I guess I kind of did, but I mostly said I wasn't going to be placing any roboports, so personal construction bots are still on the table. Personally, I prefer my challenges to test my brain and not my patience, and doing this without construction bots would fall squarely under the latter category. And there's robot frames, plus some dirty processing units I'll need to make the power armor and exoskeletons. I won't need much military science, so I'm just gonna hand feed it. Apparently, I forgot to fuel the furnace that was supposed to be making walls for the science this whole time, so while that works, I'm gonna go expand the rest of the iron patch. This is also the first debut of the stack inserters that the red circuits let us build. With both military science and chemical science, we can get another very useful research. Tanks. And not the fluid kind, the exploding kind. By hand-feeding steel and explosives, we can make cannon shells. And just in time, because our pollution is about to reach some nests we couldn't clear without them. After clearing out a bunch of nests, it'll be a long time before our pollution is at any risk of triggering another attack. So then I stand around for like 30 minutes making personal equipment like solar panels and roboports by hand. All of this is to prepare for expansion. You didn't think this was going to be the final base. It sucks a little bit too much to get to that space science I promised. And for that, we're going to need trains, so I add that and rail signals to our extremely weird mall. Oh yeah, and here's some hand-fed concrete. I'll need this later, so might as well get it running now. Something this bizarre is just a wonder to see in motion. Might as well get a good look at the base, because we're going to be leaving it behind soon. Now that I have bots, I don't need to fumble around with the wagons anymore. This new base is going to need a lot of power, and steam boilers on top of coal patches just ain't gonna cut it, so nuclear is our best option. Some people think you need Kovarak's enrichment research before you can set up nuclear power. You don't, and let me do the math for you. One nuclear fuel cell lasts for 200 seconds, and 1 unit of enriched uranium allows you to make 10 fuel cells for 2,000 seconds of power. One mining drill on uranium will take 4 seconds to produce 1 uranium ore. Uranium processing takes 10 ore with a 99.3 chance of producing U-238 and a 0.7 chance of producing enriched U-235. This means on average you'll need to run this process 143 times to create 1 enriched uranium, which is 1,430 ore. That means it would take 5,720 seconds for a single mining drill to give you enough uranium ore to get 1 enriched uranium worth 2,000 seconds of power. That's right, you only need 4 miners per reactor. Sorry about the tirade, but what that amounts to is that this is all I'll need to completely power my base. We'll just stick all the buildings we need in the mall, and by the time we get around to building it, we'll probably have enough. Now I'll need to design the train network. Remember, I have no belts, so if I want to move ore anywhere, I'll need to build the miners right against the tracks so they'll mine straight into the wagons. Obviously this wastes a lot of space, which is why I went with the Railworld preset. I head over to the lab, aka the editor extensions mod, and finalize the design. Basically, it's going to be a bunch of train stops side by side to maximize the number of working miners. With Railworld, most of the ore patches are big enough for us to fit 8 wagons along the ore patch, but I'm making these trains 16 wagons long. They'll wait at the first station until they're full, or for about 1,000 seconds, which is the amount of time it would take 4 miners to fill a cargo wagon, then it moves on to the second station and starts loading the back 8. I didn't need to design them like this, but I kinda just wanted really long trains. It's not the prettiest design since half the train needs to hang out the back when it's at the first station, but it works. Now I just gotta build my rail network. Everyone should have one of these blueprint books full of rails. This is where the forges will go. The unloading is another issue. It might not seem obvious at first, but without underground belts, it is impossible to move anything across the train tracks. There just isn't an inserter that can drop something 2 tiles away. Now it is possible to set up a train that just kinda sits on the rails and acts as a bridge, then moves out of the way when another train needs to pass, but god, if I think about that too much, I might actually try to build it. No, we don't want to do that, so that means double-headed trains. They can go in a one-way and then come right back out. And when they do come out, they'll hook onto this lower track that lets them go either way. Turns out it takes a lot of room to hold 18 wagons. It's almost as long as our entire old base. So the reason the trains are 16 wagons long is so I can run 64 electric furnaces straight off the train. That'll make 40 plates per second per lane. Now this is just the way I decided to do it. I could have unloaded it all into stationary cargo wagons and had it sent off at light speed down a massive lane of furnaces, but I don't want to think too hard on how to hyper-optimize this stuff. Also, this doesn't leave enough room for beacons, which I would not recommend. But I've got a problem to solve, and this solves that problem. Let's just say it's part of the challenge. So we just keep making furnace lanes. You can see why I needed nuclear power for this. I'm tentatively going for 100 science per minute, and 192 iron furnaces is a little low for that number, but as they say in TV, we'll fix it in post. For the brick furnaces, we'll only need like 24, so the back half of the train can be used to unload the stone used in purple science. Setting these things up is always the most tedious part. I ran out of electric furnaces, so while I wait for those to build up, I start setting up the other resources. For the coal I won't need 16 wagons, and so I'll need it for his plastic. And some stone is to the northeast, but I gotta clear out some nests first. Setting these huge mines up with just 20 personal construction bots is a little time consuming, but it's better than no bots. I'm putting the oil refining here. It's not very exciting since it's the same with or without belts, but at least it's easy. And there's the finished oil cracking. Sorry if you don't know how oil cracking works because I forgot to record me building it. So near the oil is where we're going to park our coal trains. Just like the other trains, they're double-headed, so they'll come in from the waiting bay and then exit down that straight bit. Here's another iron mine. And here's the stone mine. The stone patches aren't big enough to fit 8 wagons on them at once, so the trains are going to need to have 12 cargo wagons instead of 16, which is still more than enough. With all the resources taken care of, we're going to need power if we want to actually turn on our forges, so here's the nuclear plant. Yes, this is the same nuclear reactor I used last video. Maybe next video I'll actually show myself building one from scratch, but not today. As usual, nuclear reactors are very thirsty. I could automate the fuel production, but a stack of 50 in each reactor is enough to power it for almost 3 hours. Even longer since I've got the inserters wired up to the steam tank so they only insert more fuel when it needs it. So yeah, I'm gonna stick to handcrafting. The ability to create fissile fuel cells with his bare hands is just one of the many reasons you shouldn't mess with a Factorio engineer. But then turning everything on would make my pollution cloud explode, so I gotta clear a bunch more nests. There's a lot of footwork that goes into stuff like this. And after clearing out every nest even remotely close, it's finally time to finish our furnaces. Here's our first trainfuls of ore arriving. I feel like most people would agree that fuel is pretty useful for running trains. And while we may not have belts or bots to move it around, we can build a fuel plant next to every single locomotive and hook it all up to the light oil. Rocket fuel is going to help a lot because these trains are slow. Ideally, you'd want more than one engine pulling 16 wagons worth of weight, but part of me likes it this way. It's just like real trains. But as ever, the price of style is function. Obviously, I need to fuel the bottom trains too. Now, I just need to place about 1 billion cargo wagons and we'll be one step closer to actual production. Some of these wagons are mixed, so I gotta set up a few filters. This stuff looks very funny on the map. The idea is that all of these lanes are going to meet up to create what is essentially an extremely bastardized version of a main bus design. Because some of these wagons have 2 different things in them, I need to make these weird splits to separate them. I originally thought I could mix all these resources together, but since I realized how easy it is to deadlock that way, I've decided to isolate everything to a dedicated wagon as much as possible. I've got 2 wagons for iron, 2 for copper, 1 for steel, and 1 for stone and brick combined. There's the light oil for the fuel refineries. Now, there's something very important missing between these wagons. The inserters. Each one of these lanes is going to need at least 40 items per second of throughput, and if you remember our chart, each stack inserter maxes out at 27 items per second, so we'll need at least 2 stack inserters at the end. But that's only at the end. Halfway down, the throughput requirement is only 20 items per second, so I can get away with using fast inserters since each one can move 7 items per second. Now that I built this here, I can just copy-paste it between all the other lanes. There is, however, that mixed lane to the left, so we'll need to replace our inserters with filter inserters and dedicate half to each resource. It's a lot of effort, but we're almost there. If only there was some kind of invention that could convey our items to where we needed them. Like, what if we stretched a belt over a series of rollers so that we could transform rotational energy into a continuous linear motion? We could call them belt conveyors. Well, one can dream. Here's where the stone comes on. I could place a chest between these, since passing things from inserter to inserter on the ground is slightly slower than a chest, but we don't need that much stone throughput. The end result of all this is now we finally have everything ready to go in nice clean rows. Now there's only one thing we're missing, and that's plastic. If I put the wagons like this, I can unload 2 of the train wagons into 1 stationary cargo wagon. Then I can put the chemical plants like this. I need a little more than 16, so we need to make these 2 wagons deep. One inserter takes in coal and another puts out plastic. Again, if we manage our filters properly, this will never deadlock. Now we just pipe in some petroleum. With this, we now have everything we need to make everything in the game. The first thing we'll need is circuits, and these are a little interesting. To keep it all from deadlocking, each ingredient is going to want its own dedicated filter inserter, and that means we're fundamentally limited by the insertion speeds. Meaning, since we only have 1 inserter available to move the finished circuits, no matter how many assemblers we add or how long we make it, this whole lane can only ever output up to 27 circuits each second. Turning copper plates into copper wires doubles their volume, and with limited inserters, that throughput is precious, so instead of using the inserters to move copper wires, instead we'll be moving copper plates, and each wagon will have its own isolated supply of copper wires. This isn't the ideal ratio because we can only fit 4 assemblers around each wagon. That means that these assemblers will be working 33% slower than ideal, so to reach our target of 27 items per second, we'll need roughly 20. And as if this run wasn't cursed enough already, here's the way to get the full throughput at these junctions. Just put a car there. We can filter their inventory just like a cargo wagon. Though we can't set an inventory limit, so unless I want this whole thing to fill up to the brim, I need to add some random filters to the other slots. I can also use them to bridge gaps, and here you can see me using them to ensure that the iron and the copper come from separate wagons. Now you might be wondering how I'm going to get the iron and copper from all the way up there to the assemblers all the way down here, and the answer is, as ever, filters. So the wagons transport things horizontally, but as long as there's the appropriate filters, I can transport them vertically too. That's the importance of making sure that the iron and copper come from alternating wagons. The inserters will never try to move iron into a wagon whose filters only allow steel, and if we make rows of long-handed inserters, even though the wagon contains both iron and copper, it'll only try to move the iron because that's the only valid slot in the wagon below. Hopefully this isn't too confusing, but it's basically an extremely janky splitter, and a way to pull one item straight down. It also looks hilarious. And there's our green circuits. It was a little long-winded, but these techniques are going to be the same ones I end up using to make everything. And just in case you didn't believe me that cars worked like this. Sometimes you see this technique in mega bases as a way to pass items from a train into a 12-beaconed assembler, but I'd like to believe that this is its true calling. Now we need red circuits. Just like the green circuits, we're going to move the copper plates and keep the copper wire within the wagon. However, since we only need one wire assembler for every 6 red circuit assemblers, I'm going to set it up like this so that the wire assembler can drop off into 2 wagons. Doing this is triggering some kind of OCD response, since it's offset from the green circuit assemblers and there's one missing. But it's optimal, and I'll just need to live with it. Just like the green circuits, each ingredient gets its own filter inserter. Fortunately, we need the copper, green circuits, and plastic bars all in equal amounts. With a maximum of 27 items per second of input, the most this lane can ever output is about 14 red circuits a second, unless we added productivity modules, which we won't. Also, I forgot to add a slot for the copper wire. We'll need a lot more than just this one lane, but with Alt plus B, we can blueprint the whole thing. Then by checking trains, it'll copy over all of the cargo wagons as well as their filters. Extremely convenient. Also, it's worth mentioning that my starter iron patch is completely run out, so now anytime I need more stack inserters or cargo wagons, I gotta take iron from the new base. Now we need to pull down the resources. Since green circuits take pretty much half of your iron and copper anyway, I've dropped them down to 1 wagon each, so I don't need to go through as many wagons anymore. I do need to get the plastic down here though. In comes the copper, and now all that leaves are the green circuits. Now that we're armed with 2 of the most important resources in the game, we can start thinking about making science. I just love that this much of my power grid goes to inserters. I'm sick of hand supplying my original base just to get supplies, so I'm re-automating all of the inserters. The first science I'm going to set up is purple science, because it's pretty much the only thing that takes stone and bricks, so I'll be able to eliminate that wagon completely, and when moving things around is this annoying, that's a really great thing. So this is about how many furnaces and productivity modules we'll need to make 100 bottles of production science a minute. Now we just need rails. I'd say roughly you want 1 rail assembler for every 2 science assemblers, but since we also need to make the iron sticks, this sort of offset design is going to work pretty well. I'm just going to have the rails insert straight into the science assemblers. That's the basic layouts, now we just need to put the materials in the wagons. The productivity modules are the easiest because the red and green circuits are just right there. The furnaces aren't bad either, because all we need to pull down is steel. These cars are just for throughput reasons. All that's left are the rails, and that means we need to pull the iron from the top down through the copper, steel, and stone wagons. We'll use a car to bridge the iron in, and now we've got rails. Route the modules and furnaces in, and there's purple science. Plus some speed modules I'm going to use to automate assembler 3s. With the stone wagons gone, the circuits will take their place. The way these cars and wagons work with inserters will never not be weird. Since yellow science takes engines, we're going to make blue science next. We've already got red circuits, and the sulfur we're just going to make on the spot, so they're not too difficult. Setting up filters to pull down items from the wagons is always a pain though. This is totally unrelated, but I just like watching the train snake down the waiting bay. Anyway, our engine assemblers are working. And here's the actual chemical science. Not too much to say about it since we've already built it once using the exact same design, but here it is. Nice. Yellow science is the big one. It takes 3 ingredients we don't have yet, and 2 of them are also needed for space science, so we'll need to make a lot of them. The flying robot frames are the trickiest part because, unlike most recipes in vanilla Factorio, they take 4 ingredients to make. This means our usual strategy of 3 inserters to carry the ingredients and 1 to carry the finished product won't work. Plus they take batteries and electric engines, which also take lubricant. They're the most complicated item on our list for sure, except for maybe, well, we'll get to it. For starters, I forgot I needed iron for the sulfuric acid, which we'll need for the batteries, and eventually processing units. Look at this thing, isn't it beautiful? This is all I really need batteries for, so I don't want to dedicate an entire lane to it, but getting them to fit is a little tough. Since electric engines and flying robot frames both take electronic circuits, we'll be able to share them in the same wagon. And since electric engines are only used automation-wise to make flying robot frames, there's no need to move them around. We'll still need to offload the finished robot frames into another wagon, but this is the best I've got. The engines come up from the bottom, while everything else comes up from the top. Now I just need to make the lubricant. Fortunately, it's the easiest thing in the world. Then I realized I'm gonna need space for a plastic lane through here, so I moved the whole fluid thing up. But now we've got flying robot frames. Now it's time for the low density structures, and if you have any hopes of automating space science, you're going to need a lot of these. They're pretty straightforward though, and by now I've pulled enough resources through the wagons that there's always a wagon to copy filters from instead of needing to do it myself again. Just like most everything else, 3 inputs, 1 output, steel, copper, plastic, boom, LDS. Now we get to watch all of our inserters do the wave. Just watching these makes the whole run feel worth it. Last ingredient is blue circuits, and they're pretty easy. Fortunately, the wagons carrying the red and green circuits are right there at the bottom, so there's no pain necessary, and the sulfuric acid just takes some pipes. We do want a lot of these though, since we'll also need them for the rocket as well. I think everyone who's played Factorio has experienced the realization of just how many circuits you need. Now we just gotta put them all together to make yellow science. I'm going to be bringing the LDS and robot frames up from this direction, but I'm gonna need a 3rd filter inserter to move the yellow science. However, with this wagon, we only have space for 2. Car's too small to bridge the gap, so I try a tank. We're getting there, but not quite. The wagon doesn't fit. How about this? Well, I've bridged the gap, but will it work? That inserter's going into the tank, and that inserter's taking out of it. 2 inserters right on top of one another. This has got to be the highlight of the run, it just feels so wrong. Anyway, we've got yellow science. If you didn't believe me that it worked, well, here it is. With yellow science out of the way, all we've really got left is green and red science, which are the easiest and we've already set up once. There's not much for me to add, so have some music while I build them. And there it is, all of the science production we'll need to beat the game. Now we just need to get them to a lab. I know I said I was only going to use actual trains for the raw resources, but it just felt appropriate here. Behold, this extremely stupid train design I made in honor of this run. It's double-headed and needs to go through that loop-de-loop to reach most of the stations, but it works. Now I can finally unlock the true potential of my inserters. It's going to take a while to research all the stuff I need to make the rocket, so I decided to set up military science in the meantime. I'm not going to automate bringing it to the lab, I'm just going to move it by hand. With our base actually producing now, our pollution cloud is getting pretty big, so this will help me clear out some of the bigger biter nests. It's a kludge, but it's my kludge. You know those things that are so obvious you assume you could never screw them up? Well, I wondered why I was short on circuits until I realized I had half as many copper furnaces as I needed. And that's not something you can just fix with modules. I'm gonna need to make 3 whole new lanes. This abomination is a shining example of why it's so important to plan ahead. And now I have died for my sins. That was my only death this whole run, by the way. Fitting. This whole thing kinda makes me want to puke. Well, what works, works. I have never done this before. I have not once ever managed to crash a train into itself. Well, just make it longer and it'll work. Now we just need to bring the copper through all these iron wagons. What a pain. We need 4 inserters to match the throughput of all those forges, so we need a tank at every junction. Beautiful. Simply beautiful. Also, we need some more batteries for our yellow science, so I do this. And now I can clear out some of these nests. And here's a new oil field. After much dilly-dallying, let's finally build this rocket. The rocket control units are easy, they just take all 3 circuits. Gotta get accumulators if you want space science. I've been playing this run so long, this build is starting to look normal. Yep, there's RCUs. Now all we're missing is rocket fuel. But that stuff's easy since all we need is fluid. Now we just gotta run the pipe. Imagine if we could do this with everything. And that's everything we need for the rocket. But not everything we need for rocket science. We still need to make the satellite. And remember when I said that robot frames were almost the most complicated thing? Well, it's this. The satellite is the most complicated recipe in vanilla Factorio. And now I've got to make it without belts. The low-density structures, rocket fuel, and processing units will be easy, but it's the solar panels, radars, and accumulators that's hard. The accumulators especially, since they require batteries. But if anyone's qualified to build this, I guess I am. Basically, this whole thing is a mess. We've got accumulators running, and these green circuits will turn on the solar panels. That just leaves the radars. There's no easy way to bring the green circuits up here, so I'm just gonna make them on the spot with this kludge. Honestly, it's kind of terrifying that I can just do this. And that's all 6 ingredients. Now we just gotta put them together. And put down the actual silo. And that's our satellite. As well as the rocket. Now we wait for it to build. Watching these inserters spaz out, it's just amazing how far we've come. Satellite is loaded, and off she goes. And there's the victory. 29 minutes. This is probably like 1/100th of the kills in my rampant video. Anyway, we're not totally done. There's one last thing to do. We gotta hook the space science up to the labs. Oh yeah, I'm still carrying it. That makes it a little less cinematic. And there it flows into the labs. That's fully automated space science without ever placing a single belt. And that's the end of the run. Thank you for joining me on this ride. I am genuinely surprised I was able to build such a functional base with only cargo wagons and inserters. Perhaps there's some potential in this kind of design, or perhaps this forbidden knowledge should have stayed buried. Ah well. Ooh, now I get to do a patron scroll. That's how you know I'm a real YouTuber now. I'm not going to insult your generosity as some do by insinuating that I do not deserve it, as you have clearly made that judgment on your own. But I cannot overstate enough how much it means to me that there's people out there who like this enough to want to give me money. Thank you. Genuinely. Oh yeah, how hard was it? Wagons out of 10. See you next time.